Hello, and we are live, and Paul, you're on the call as well. Amazing. Hi, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes just to make sure that all of our attendees can kind of get in onto the Zoom. I don't know why, but Zoom doesn't let you kind of let everyone come in at once. I think it's because we've got quite a few people attending this week. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. If you are joining us today, we are here for the final session of the Tech Recruitment Takeover. And what a week it has been. Thank you so much to everyone who has joined us so far. Like I said, I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes just to kind of make sure that everyone gets in okay, and then we will get started with some introductions. I'll take you guys through the usual housekeeping, kind of what's been going on with us, and then yeah, we'll get started. Christine, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name's Christine Hearn. I have joined Vodafone about 2 years ago, and initially joined in a HR business partner position. And then more recently, I've actually moved over to a secondment role in the resourcing team. So I've got a kind of slightly unique perspective of understanding both the HRBP side and resourcing side within Vodafone.
Amazing. And then Rosemary, could you introduce yourself as well, please?
Oh, hi. Hi, my name is Rosemary Wilson. I am the founder of Pragmatica Coaching, and this is actually the second chapter of my career. My background is in fintech, working in oil and gas predominantly, and now I've moved on to the human side of change. And obviously D&I is a really important topic, and it's a topic that obviously I'm a Black woman that I hold dear to my heart, and it's really exciting for me to get involved with this initiative. And I mainly work with one-to-one with women around confidence issues, but I also work with organisations to help them to nurture their talent, and whilst they support a culture of D&I within the organisation. So that's just me, a little bit of my background. Thank you. And
Sean, please.
Hello, I was just find the mute button. I don't know why I struggle all the time with 9 months of Zoom use. I'm Sean. I'm a talent acquisition manager at BGSS and Spark, which is software consultancy. I also perform a squad lead role, which is kind of like pastoral care for about 40 people within the business, and also a D&I champion for our Leeds and Sheffield offices.
And finally, Paul.
Hi there, Paul Humphreys. I'm responsible for tech hiring across EMEA at JP Morgan. I've been with JP for 7.5 years, and prior to that, I've worked in a number of different tech-focused companies, and before that, worked in recruitment agencies, always within tech recruitment. JP Morgan is a big US investment bank, and we've been particularly focused on diversity and gender diversity in our efforts over the last 7.5 years I've been with the bank, but we're very, very focused on that as an organisation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, guys. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen so that we can kind of go through some housekeeping. Can everyone see my screen? Perfect. So we're going to be talking through today how to place D&I at the heart of your organisation. Just some kind of general housekeeping bits and bobs. So when you're asking questions, please do ask them in the Q&A section, and then I will make sure to make sure they're answered throughout the session. And also please tell your friends. So we have a YouTube series. So all these sessions this week are going up onto a playlist, and they'll also be available on our website as soon as possible. You can find us on Twitter, hackjob_co. We're on LinkedIn as well, of course. And if you want to share anything about these sessions, please make sure to use the hashtags TRT and hashtag Tech Recruitment Takeover. Wine tasting. So this is kind of the final call for wine tasting. If you've attended 4 out of 5 of these sessions this week, you will receive a free invite to the HackJob Wine Club, which is a very great initiative that we run. I've been on quite a few of them, immensely enjoy them myself. This is a completely free virtual event on us, and you'll have the chance to meet with your TRT peers, as well as our panelists as well. This is an open invite for all of our panelists, who some will be joining us for the session, and you get to learn about wine with a professional sommelier and big bottles of wine as well. We don't do things by halves. They're not little tester bottles, they're big normal bottles. So yeah. And then today's agenda. So obviously we're talking about D&I and how we can really make sure it's cemented in the workplace. And we're going to be discussing, things that businesses can be doing to improve D&I today, breaking down the barriers to tech, how to remove bias at a really granular level, how we kind of measure that meaningful success, and also championing organisations that are kind of doing it really well. We all kind of really want to share our favourites and who we're kind of rooting for in that space. So I'll stop sharing my screen. And yeah, I will get started with our questions. So I kind of wanted to dive straight in, and obviously, you know, the events of this year and the past few years have had a huge impact on the world as we know it today. And obviously, you know, now more than ever, diversity and inclusion is regarded as one of the biggest priorities for businesses, and we all really do have a responsibility to make positive change. I wanted to start by asking our panelists, what's the one thing that you believe that organisations and people listening in today should be doing to make a difference and kind of diversifying their workplace? You know, what's one thing that they could literally go away and get the ball rolling on? So Paul, if I could start with you, please.
Sure. I would probably say data. So I think you can't impact or have an impact on a topic unless you know where you are and you know the market in which you're operating. So I think data around diversity can be problematic. You know, candidates tend to have relatively low levels of self-identification at application stage, but I think you need to find a way to measure where you are and where you're trying to get to. Particularly in tech, a lot of our stakeholders are very data driven and they're numbers people, and I've certainly found it's difficult to get buy-in sometimes from hiring managers and senior managers unless you can tell a compelling story around numbers. So I would say, you know, you can't influence a black box process. You need to understand your funnel of candidates. You need to proactively target to make up for any shortfall. So data is my answer.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I mean, if we're going to move the needle, we need to kind of actually see kind of what we're dealing with internally, what the market looks like externally, and how we can kind of move that forward. Rosemary, what's your take on that?
So one thing, I know you said one thing, but I'm going to kind of use the one thing as an umbrella to cover a few things to give people ideas. So I always think decide what D&I really means to your organization, because you know there are different organizations on this call, for instance, and there are so many more in the world. So decide what it actually means to your organization, because it doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. So you've got to really think about what it means to the organization. Why are you doing it, or why are you making any changes? Moral obligation or moral responsibility is just not enough of an initiative. It's obviously got to be more than that, and more of a commercial or business aspect as well. So if you think about the opportunities having a diverse workforce brings to you, think about the opportunities, the benefits, the growth, your reputation. And when your employees are satisfied, when they feel valued and work and are celebrated and feel worthy, then they're more likely to give back. They're going to be more productive, they're going to be more effective, and they're going to champion your organization as well, and they're going to stay. So ultimately your ROI is going to, your bottom line is going to be there. And thinking about your diverse thinking, the people that you have in your organization, when they put all their thoughts together, you're obviously going to have much more of a rich business environment. So when I said decide what D&I really means to you, they're just some things that you can think about when you're making that decision, rather than just thinking about the moral obligation or the moral responsibility and duty that we know is important. So just some ideas and thoughts for people to go away and think about and act on.
Definitely. And I think that's such an easy thing for people to do as well, isn't it? Like you can literally come away from this call and kind of start jotting down, you know, what does diversity mean to me? What should it mean for my business? Definitely. Sean, what do you think people can start doing today, you know, if they were to come off this call?
Echo everything that Paul and Rosemary said. I think one thing is that internal advocacy. I think if you don't have buy-in at the very top, then as individuals that are passionate about it, you're going to really struggle to get any traction. So I do think you need to have that buy-in at your top level. And it's a great one that actually came up on a panel a couple of months ago. And I think it's something we all need to do, is just get comfortable being uncomfortable, because it's not, if it was a very easy subject, that we wouldn't be having these calls if everything was going the way we want it to go. So you need to be prepared to be uncomfortable, and that's not a bad thing. We're all going to go through it, but you're not going to be able to influence or affect change without getting into that sort of state of mind and that transition. So I think that's a really big one. Just don't be afraid to be asking questions is a big thing.
Definitely. And I love that analogy, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, because diversity and inclusion, it's an incredibly uncomfortable topic. Even talking about it with your best mate, with someone who you work with, like it's hard. And it's hard because we don't all have we don't have all the knowledge, we don't have all the experiences. The only way that we can kind of solve it is, by working together to make that positive change. No, I love that sentiment, definitely. I mean, Christine, obviously.
I think just one part on that, Daisy, sorry. Just one thing to sneakily add in is it's as a recruiter and been doing this 12 years, it's not just recruitment. You need to look at everything from that marketing and how you market yourself. And also, it's great if you start bringing in a lot of diverse hires into your organization, but it's not great if you actually don't have clear career pathways and support for individuals once they're in the business. So there's no point hiring a load of amazing talent if 12 months later they're all going to leave because you don't actually support their individuals when they're there. So that's just one other thing I'd add. It's that full spectrum that we need to look at.
No, I mean, again, I completely agree with you. I do think that sometimes it does seem like diversity inclusion, it really lies with just the recruitment function, when actually it's a whole business ecosystem. It's a whole organization's responsibility to kind of make sure that they are being inclusive from every single function and sector within the business. And that comes to, the kinds of things that a CEO might say, like all the way down to kind of the internal events that you might run for your colleagues and all these kinds of things. So definitely. Christine, obviously you come from this from an HR perspective, so I'd really love to know kind of your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I think definitely building on some of the points made, and I think some of the comments from Rosemary in particular, I think it's really important that we're mindful there isn't a kind of one size fits all approach when it comes to talking about diversity and inclusion. And there are so many different dynamics to consider given each individual group that we might be speaking about. So whether that's females in technology, whether that's LGBT+, whether it's BAME, and each of those groups will have their own unique needs and challenges. And I think it's really important to try and be mindful of that when we're thinking about an approach to take. And therefore, with that in mind, I think the biggest recommendation that I would make is to really listen as much as possible. So whether that's listening to your employees, whether that's paying attention to the market and what's happening more broadly in the wider ecosystem, trying to really understand what those challenges and needs are, so that then we can design a solution that's tailored to those individual needs. I think that's a really key thing to bear in mind. And I think within that, it's also important to remember that this is a constantly moving space. It's constantly evolving, constantly changing. So you might find something that works and starts to drive change, but that's not going to remain static. It's going to be continuously moving. So I think it's always doing that check-in, making sure that we're listening, and then adapting our approach on the back of that is really important.
Definitely. I mean, if we look at how diversity and inclusion was kind of looked at and treated even a couple of years ago, it's drastically different, isn't it, to how it is now. So I completely agree. And, finding these tailored solutions as well, you're so right, that's so important, because we are all individuals, we are all completely different, and something that might work for me might not work for you and vice versa. So definitely. We've had a couple of questions in the Q&A, but I'm going to come back to them later. As they kind of fit in with some questions that we have later on. But I also kind of wanted to talk about kind of the atmosphere in tech, I suppose. In 2019, the digital tech sector, we know it grew 6 times faster than any other industry in the UK. And currently we kind of estimate that 2.9 million people and counting are employed in the UK's digital tech economy. But that being said, women still only account for around 17% of IT specialists in the UK. And I don't want to kind of make this discussion just around women in tech, because I don't think diversity and inclusion should just be about women in tech. There are so many other kind of subjects within diversity and inclusion. It's not all just about women. Women play a really important part in that, but there's lots of other things to consider. And, you know, when we kind of think about tech, your mind kind of tends to go towards, oh, like I know kind of this prominent male figure in tech, or, you know, beer, ping pong, pizza, you know, when in actuality, those activities and those kind of things just aren't always suitable for everyone. You know, if you're a parent who's got to pick up the kids after work, for example, so you can't kind of stay and be in those social activities, or, you know, you're someone who's a bit more introverted and maybe you don't do well in social situations. And I'm kind of thinking bigger picture here, but, you know, firstly, how can we kind of break down some of those barriers in tech specifically? And then how do we kind of use this as a stepping stone to balance the scales overall? Sean, if I could come to you, please.
Sorry, I couldn't click the mute button. Yeah, so I look at a lot of things, obviously with my recruitment hat on, as well as the sort of D&I side of things. I think a lot of these conversations we're having are great, but we don't want to be sat here in 10 years having the same conversations, because it means none of us are actually influencing sort of better tomorrow in that sense. So we've, as a business, we've pledged 80 new roles into next year for people from different routes into the business. So we've always had a graduate scheme, which will continue, but we're also opened up returners and sort of get into tech schemes, so people cross-training in their careers. So we've got to remember, careers aren't always for life anymore. You can have 3, 4, 5 different careers, especially as the retirement age keeps rising. And looking at a lot of digital apprenticeships as well, which I think are great, because they went around when I dropped out of sixth form in my first year, and that would have been something I would have loved to have the opportunity to do. But it's also working and engaging with people in your community. So going into schools to actually try and showcase to kids about the opportunities in tech, working with the colleges. There's a university, a lot of businesses within Leeds worked within Leeds Trinity when they were pulling together their sort of STEM program. So they're actually working with the local businesses to understand what we were looking for from graduates. So rather than, you know, teach out-of-date tech that nobody wants anymore or isn't really hiring for, they wanted to make it relevant so they could make sure that as many of their graduates are as employable as possible. And from a recruitment perspective, it's opening up the way you sort of do things. So this year we've all been faced with, we're all remote working. Some businesses have been championing this for years, but it's obviously very prominent again now. But what other things can we do? So in a previous role, when I worked at the BBC, we actually had loads of software engineers to hire, which, as anyone recruiting tech knows, that's a fun market to go into. But we actually opened up part-time roles. So we worked with the business to go, actually, could we do this on a job share basis, or do you need somebody full-time all the time? Can we condense days? You know, all the different options that you could have. And what we found was we drove up loads of applications. So a lot of our competition in the market probably weren't speaking to if they weren't offering that option. And it went beyond, you know, people with children, or, you know, we'd expect parents maybe wanted some of that flexibility. You actually tapped into people that may care for other family members, and just people that didn't want to work full-time and wanted to work part-time, and that worked for their life as well. So I think there's quite a lot of different avenues where we can broaden that talent pool, rather than, as it stands at the moment, the majority of us do the typical thing of, I hire from company B, they hire from C, they hire from A, and we've kind of gone round and look at ourselves, and we've not driven our headcount at all. We've just put a lot of effort in just to rotate staff ultimately. So I think it's really engaging at that sort of grassroots kind of level. So when we sit here again, you know, we've hopefully got a much broader demographic of workforce in tech.
I think I love what you said there about kind of looking at people's work days and what works for them, because I think if this year has taught us anything, it's that the standard 9 to 5, it really doesn't have to be a thing. Like, we can actually accommodate parents, carers, you know, people who literally just cannot face a morning. Do you know what I mean? You know, we can accommodate so many different types of people. This year has definitely kind of pushed that forward. Rosemary, I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this topic as well.
Yeah, thanks. There's so many barriers that we have to look at, And I think one of the interesting things that I've seen that works really well with some of the organisations I've worked with is the hiring process around neurodiversity. So I think I've mentioned this before, that they actually have a different interview process, for instance, for someone who may be neurodiverse, so that because they're not comfortable with a traditional type interview process, so they've made special accommodations to help them to be onboarded into the company or interviewed for the company, so that they feel more comfortable and that they shine in their own environment, which I think works really well. That's a great way to get different types of people into the organisation. And touching on what Sean said about, you've got this small talent of great people, and we poach from each other, and we say we recommend people who are like us or that are like someone else that we know, and we're not really actively looking for different people. But the other thing that you can do is actually take a chance on a different person, a different type of person, and see what happens, because that's ultimately your aim, to get different ways of thinking, different types of people, what they look like, what they are like, how they behave, how they act. That's what you're ultimately trying to do, and allowing them to fit into the organisation. So take a chance. Rather than poaching the best person from company B, look at what you've got in your talent pool. What can you do? How can you promote someone within? And maybe who's not quite ready yet, they can do the job hands down, but that they can be nurtured or mentored to do the role ultimately, because they're a great talent. So that's another way to kind of move around some of the barriers that we've got, and thinking about sharing best practice. So I think I've said this before as well, that there's different organisations here, and listening to what everyone's doing is really great. So having a forum where people share best practices, what works as well. I've tried this new thing or different thing and it worked really well, or that didn't really work. That, share your screw ups as well. Let's be transparent. So that's some different ways of thinking to get people on board and comfortable within your organisation, and really in the inclusion piece of what we're talking about as well.
I completely agree, especially in terms of what can you do with your people. Are there people who you've got in your organisation who are really kind of keen to do a different kind of job? Like, how can you upskill those people? Definitely. Like, I think there are so many ways to kind of look at diversity and inclusion. I think that's actually the really great thing about it, is that it isn't that kind of one size fits all like we've previously discussed, and just kind of thinking about, okay, that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to spend X amount hiring this person who works at this amazing organisation. Instead, I don't have to do that. Instead, I could actually do this, and kind of that real grassroots level, definitely. I mean, Christine, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I think in honesty, we need to drive such substantial change to really make a shift in this. It's almost outside of just what one organisation can do. It starts to become a question of actually what can we accomplish by working together as part of a broader community. So I guess to pull on some examples of things that Vodafone specifically has driven, earlier this year they actually launched a Change the Face initiative, which essentially was a call to action to a number of different technology leaders to join that initiative and make a pledge to increase diversity and equality in the sector. So whilst that was part of a kind of broader activity and a broader piece of work, it really came down to each of those organisations who joined and made a pledge to think about what can we do to address inequalities within our organisation? How can we really make some steps and some moves to eradicate bias and discrimination and so forth? And an example of something that Vodafone did within that as part of their own pledge was actually to introduce something called a Future Jobs Finder, which is an online tool that essentially helped individuals to be matched to digital jobs that they might be suitable for. I think the aim behind that was, so often we know that females, as an example of a diverse group, will self-select themselves out of roles if they don't think that they're 100% suitable for all of the criteria on that job description, whereas actually helping individuals to be matched to a role, and that matching saying you could be suitable for this position, helps to break down those barriers and essentially for individuals to see themselves in positions that they otherwise wouldn't. I think building on the grassroots comment that's come up a few times, I completely agree with that. And again, kind of looking at something that Vodafone's done around that, we've actually been running an initiative called Code Like a Girl for a number of years now. And that essentially provides coding training to teenage girls across 26 of our markets overall. But it's really, really important in terms of actually helping them to gain some skills that are really relevant in that space at a very young age that they can then build on if they want to. But equally in starting to help them consider different career paths, such as in engineering or technology, that they otherwise wouldn't have done. So I think there's different things that we can do at different layers, but it's important to think of not just us as an organisation and what we can do, but also when we come together, what we can achieve as a whole.
Absolutely. The initiatives that you guys have in place at Vodafone are absolutely incredible. And again, it's just that kind of looking at the inside in, using your kind of resource. You're a huge company, and what you guys are kind of doing to make that change is brilliant. Really, I highly recommend like anyone who's listening to kind of go and check out some of the initiatives that Vodafone have, because I know they're on their websites. Paul, obviously you work at JP Morgan, a huge organisation, and I know that you guys are really kind of doing a lot in this space as well to kind of break down those barriers. Can you tell us a bit about that, please?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose for me, when we talk about barriers, there are those external barriers where people might, to Rosemary's point, self-select and decide not to apply when you might wish that they did. We would actually like to hire more people who haven't necessarily worked for other banks. We'd like that diversity of thought. We'd like people from other industries. But I think there's also your internal barriers, and that's something we've been really focused on. So we've tried to re-educate our hiring manager population to fundamentally think differently about talent. I think there is a widespread challenge in the tech community where we tend to hire purely for skills. Somebody leaves or a project starts and we need X, Y, and Z technical skills. And of course, technical ability is important. The work needs to be done. But actually, what we found is that behaviors are a far better indicator of future success. Skills can be learnt and often quite quickly. I don't need to actually hire a software engineer who's worked on a equity derivatives platform. That's knowledge that can be gained actually quite quickly. What I need is to find software engineers who are curious and who are collaborative and who bring the other people into the discussion and who can really empathize with their clients and understand their requirements and translate those into technical solutions. And actually what we found over the last couple of years is whenever we've studied our high performing technical population, it's those softer skills and behaviors that are much better indicators of future success than just hard technical skills. As I say, skills can be learned. So really trying to get our hiring manager community to think longer term about the how they assess talent and look for those behaviors. I would say that's one kind of practical thing where we've really tried to change how we perceive the potential in the candidates that we bring to the table.
Brilliant, honestly, such incredible stuff. Yeah, I love that, definitely. I mean, moving the question on slightly, for D&I to kind of really take a strong hold in people's hearts and minds, and not just the places they work, the education piece is incredibly important. What steps have you taken, and what would you recommend personally, Rosemary, to kind of educate and knowledge share within your organisations to kind of remove barriers again, but also kind of champion advocacy at that really granular level? So Rosemary, could we start with you, please?
Yeah, so obviously there's a lot of what I do is around education and training, but for me, there's a lot of D&I training, there's a lot of tick boxes. Yeah, you on board, you tick, yeah, I get it, I know, don't be rude to people are different, etc. But people don't really necessarily mean it, they don't really feel it emotively. So there's an element of when you enable someone to feel it emotively, then it really makes a difference. And the way you do that is by asking self-reflective questions or bringing self-awareness to say, what would it feel like to be excluded? What does it feel like when you exclude someone else? It means that they don't feel as if they belong or that they're included. And when you do exercises or workshops or whatever it is, conversations, whatever that looks like in your organization, that's when you're more likely to bring D&I into the hearts and minds, as you put it, hearts and minds of everybody, because, you know, there's lots of D&I initiatives happening, and some are working well, some not so well. Some people are, oh God, another D&I, that old chestnut. You know, there's some people that are not really embracing it. So until it's more meaningful for each person, then it can be quite difficult to really roll that culture out within an organization. But I think that's really important to keep doing it, not just one-off exercises, but try and make it more personalized. I know that's at a cost of time, resources, money, but that's important, and that you keep it consistently throughout the organization, and make it matter, make it count, make it personalized, and have conversations. I think that's really important. Facilitated, structured, informal, formal, whatever they look like, just keep having those conversations. I think that's really, really, really important. Yeah, the biggest question is what would it feel like if you were excluded? That is a really straightforward, you know, what would it feel like if you were excluded from your organization or from a group in your organization because of the color of your hair, the color of your eyes, how you spoke, your background, your religion, your sexuality? What would it feel like to you? And even that simple question makes it more personal as well. So I go off into a tangent a little bit, but that's quite meaningful, obviously, for me, and within the subject of D&I, it's quite powerful.
I completely agree. And I also think putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and thinking about actually how would they feel about it, that's an excellent, even a key takeaway that people can take away today. Paul, how are you championing advocacy at JP Morgan?
I think it's really important not just to preach the gospel, but also to be the change yourself. We're all managers of teams, and I think it's really important to demonstrate those behaviours as well as advise others on them. So in my team, for example, not only do I actively try and bring people in from different backgrounds, but for example, I've also had two men in the team take shared paternity leave, and we've really celebrated that when they've left and when they've come back, and really kind of advocated for that. I think we try and encourage open discussion. When we recently had the Black Lives Matter protests and after George Floyd's murder, we wanted to talk about that as a team, and we had a meeting to talk about that, and actually found some people were holding back from contributing, and we asked why, and we found out that a lot of people didn't feel they necessarily had the right language. They were terrified of putting their foot in it and saying the wrong thing. So then we went out and looked at various TED Talks and podcasts and other kind of content where people could raise their awareness and their education and get more comfortable talking about those subjects. So I would say those two things. I'd say be the change you want to see, and also bias and inequality festers in the shadows, in dark places. You have to bring these topics out onto the table, and you have to talk about them, and you have to make sure that people have got a language and the tools that they need to talk meaningfully about those things. So I think we can all help that to happen.
Christine, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I completely agree with Paul and Rosemary's points. And I guess from Vodafone's perspective, what we'll try and do is look at this from multiple layers of the organisation. So I think there's that kind of global company-wide engagement, which is very much around broad education. So whether that's through training, which we've kind of tried to build out quite a lot over the last few years. So I think we started off on that kind of unconscious bias training journey, and now we're moving into much more kind of evidence-based training, such as bystander intervention, active allyship, and so forth. So I think there's that kind of one size fits all, making sure everyone's got the same core knowledge and information, but then it's how do you start to translate that down to more of an individual level, and to Rosemary's point, make that more personal. I think there's lots of different ways that you can do that. So one thing that we do is run webinars across different areas of the business, but focused in on different topics. So actually, it's a neurodiversity conversation. We recently had a webinar completely focused on neurodiversity and really equipping people to A, understand what that means, but B, how that can impact people within the workplace, and then see what can each individual do as an action or a kind of call to action around that and to help mitigate it. We also have, and I think this is something that we lean on a lot, quite a large number of employee networks. So for example, we've got a Women in Technology network, we've got an LGBT plus network and an LGBT plus allies network, and we have executive sponsorship within those networks, which I think is really, really important in terms of keeping that kind of that buy-in, ensuring people understand that there's support and buy-in at a high level, but then equally that there's access and support at all layers of the organisation. And then I think to the points that were just made, it's really, really important then for, I guess, managers to think about how they're taking that broader education, but making it personalized to each individual in terms of, well, how do I actually take all of this information and apply it in my day-to-day? So actually an example from my own team, so my own technology resourcing team, we actually had our D&I manager come in and do a few sessions with the team, really focused around actually, you know, what language should I be using on a day-to-day basis? How can I actually translate some of this information into action that I can take on a day-to-day basis when I'm speaking to candidates, when I'm speaking to hiring managers? And we found that really, really impactful, because I think everyone had the right intent, but they didn't necessarily know how to actually take steps to drive change. So I think lots of different things, but all of those combined can be really impactful.
I love what you just said there about having the intent, but not always knowing how to kind of say or do the right thing. Absolutely. I think as long as the intent is there, you can always learn from your prejudices, from your mistakes, from whatever that may be, and kind of move forward and really make a kind of positive impact. Sean, obviously you are a D&I champion. How do you champion advocacy within your organisation?
Got 3 more yesterday for Leeds. I'm so happy I'm not on my own. But it's, yeah, so there's lots we do, and a lot that Rosemary, Chrissy and Paul touched on as well. So, you know, as a easy thing to do, we've brought in a lot of D&I modules and learning as part of people's mandatory training. So it's not just InfoSec and bribery and GDPR. We do a lot of, so the D&I champion's role is to help sort of facilitate and coordinate different events and blogs and various things. So we do a lot of lunch and learns when we all were allowed in the same building together and allowed to collaborate and see each other. I imagine a few people on this webinar today will know Theo Smith. He actually kindly came over and did his talk on neurodiversity, which we had a huge turnout for, which was wonderful. And it's really nice for people to hear from people that have experienced things as well, as opposed to someone like me trying to not preach, but you know, it doesn't come across as the same way as people who can share real life experiences. And we've done that with a lot of blogs as well, through people who are willing to share. So Paul touched on the Black Lives Matter previously, and we sort of had a discussion as a business of, do we want to put something out publicly on our LinkedIn and Twitter, which a lot of companies were doing, but we decided against it, not because we don't support it. It was actually, well, we need to look at ourselves and what can we do better as an organization. So rather than just put a post up to try and get likes and you know, gains that way, it was more of, well, we need to have a hard look, where can we improve? And we actually engage people within the business, and some people shared blogs of really personal stories, which is actually quite heartbreaking, because you don't even begin to think of what some people have experienced in their life. And it's sort of really sad, but at the same time such a great step for people that felt comfortable within the organization to be able to share that personal experience that we could all sort of learn from and go away and try to improve what we do as individuals and as an organisation. And then we try to do some fun things as well. So when lockdown happened back in March, which I hate saying because it's forever, we use Slack at work. So we created the channel across the business called Good Vibe Tribe. So I'll have some fun things in. So there's a Halloween theme week when it was Halloween, but we also use it for more important matters as well, where you can educate but also get people to have a bit of fun. So we had a theme on Ada Lovelace Day for a whole week with quizzes and TED Talks and various different things. And we did the same for we did a week of it for Black History Month as well. So it's actually just trying to get it just in people's day-to-day a bit more as well as just trying to we're just going to do this one thing and we're going to share this talk and that's it. We're trying to look at it in different ways and get people asking questions. And I saw someone commented around language use, and a lot of people, myself included at times, will say hey guys to people, and there's nothing intentional about that, but it's being able to take a step back and try and look at how we use our own language as well, which is difficult, and sometimes it does take someone to point that out. And it's, again, get comfortable being uncomfortable. It's not a bad thing. We're all trying to improve what we're doing, and I think you've got to be open to not criticism per se, but if we do use language we maybe shouldn't use, is try to actually learn from that and educate ourselves as well.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. Education is so important. I mean, I slipped the tongue and I said, oh, Paul, what are you guys doing at JP Morgan? And as soon as I saw that comment, I felt so bad. And I actually wanted to talk about it after this, because yeah, you're completely right. Like, we shouldn't just address people as guys. And it definitely is that kind of guise of, kind of a lot of organizations having typically all male teams, particularly in tech. So definitely, I completely agree. And it's not criticism, it's pointing it out so that people can kind of learn from that and kind of make sure that going forward that actually doesn't happen again. It's a positive thing, definitely. Speaking of championing advocacy, we have actually had a question in the Q&A. And I wanted to start with you, Rosemary, on this, but what are people's thoughts on positive discrimination? Is it okay? This person has said that they come across it a lot for getting females in tech. So Rosemary, I really kind of wanted to start with you on this, just to kind of see.
So the phrase goes around, we need more women in tech, we need more women in tech. Okay, understandable, we know why it's happening. But ultimately, the women that you're getting in, so positive, or the people that you're getting in, whatever that positive discrimination looks like, so it's not just women, it's whatever that looks like, is they need to be able to do the job. So positive discrimination, whatever that looks like, can they do the job? If it's yes, that's great. If it's we're getting these people in just because they fit that box, but they can't do the job, then obviously no. So we need to open up the opportunities for more, non-white men to be able to apply for the roles. So if that's what positive discrimination looks like, so be it. We could call it something else, but that's what a lot of people will see it as. We're just opening up the gates, really. We're just opening up the gates, and we're allowing more people who would previously not have had the opportunities to apply for the roles. It's a change. So it looks like it's that other people are being discriminated against, but that's not really what's happening. We're looking for a change that should have come a long time ago, but there's a phrase that everything in time, and that's what's happening now. We're just opening up the floor, or whatever, the organisation, the gates for other people to be a part of the story and the journey of the organisation. I don't see anything negative about that personally. So that's my kind of 2-minute take on this. Obviously a longer discussion, but that's they're my thoughts on that topic. And we should be opening up the gates for people to who traditionally were not considered for tech roles to be given the opportunity to be able to do that and to rise within the organisation. We should be doing more of that. We are doing more of that.
I completely agree. Opening the gates 100% is absolutely what we need to be doing. And also I do agree, I think personally, if that person can do a job and we can break down that barrier, they can do a job just as well as somebody else, but we break down that barrier to make it a bit easier for them to enter, then absolutely. Christine, what are your thoughts on it from an HR perspective?
I mean, I think Rosemary's articulated it really, really well, but I think, we're at a point, and I think all organizations are at a point where there is imbalance, and that's not something that we intended to get to, but it's a place that we're at, and therefore you have to take positive action in order to really change that. But I think it's quite a common thing to come up, certainly from kind of hiring managers or from individuals in the wider organization, to say, oh, well, you're just trying to put a female in that role to kind of tick a box. And I think it's really, really important to understand, to the point that Rosemary made, the person has to be able to do the role, and we'd have to believe they can go into that role and actually be successful in it. But B, my perception of this is really it's about creating a level playing field, and for various reasons, as we've kind of touched on today, there are times when it's not a level playing field. So I think taking proactive action to try and level that out and mean that we can really start to drive the change that we need to create more diversity is only a positive thing. So I think back to the kind of education question that we went through previously, often when you actually have that discussion with someone, you explain all the different factors to that and the rationale for why, and actually then how we're approaching something, often they come on board quite quickly, but it's more of an education piece and awareness piece.
Definitely. Paul, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I'd agree with a lot of the previous comments. I mean, if you keep doing the same things, you're going to have the same outcomes. So if you're trying to affect a change, you have to change something, right? I don't think you need discrimination. I don't think you fight racism with positive racism, right? I don't think you need to discriminate. I think it's about positively targeting groups that might not naturally apply to you or think that they would be welcome working for you. So I think bringing people to the table proactively, and then educating your client groups around how we assess them and getting people to think differently. I think they're positive, legal, straightforward steps that we can take that will achieve the same outcome. So for me, it's not about trying to mandate a particular outcome. We should always be hiring the best person for the job, but I think we can really question, what is the best fit for that job. And I think for me, it's about uncovering, potential that perhaps previously we would have overlooked. I think that's a more positive kind of way to view it.
Absolutely. Looking at what you've overlooked, definitely. Sean, your thoughts?
I don't think I can really add much to those three comments, to be fair. But I think with my recruitment hat on, it's as everyone said, it's you wanting to drive that diverse candidate pool to you. So actually, what are you doing to do that? If you're heavily reliant on referrals, as Rosemary mentioned earlier, you get in a lot of the same people. So, I could get somebody who went to Cambridge University and joined, and then they refer 10 friends, and I might start to get more diverse on gender, but I'm getting a lot of the same sort of people from background and thought process and stuff like that. So I'm not getting that much diversity at the end of it. So it's looking at how you market yourself as an organization, how you advertise. Do you keep questioning what you're doing? It's none of us are perfect. None of us will be perfect at this, but actually, again, it's kind of this, we've come together as a community. So actually sharing experience, sharing what's working for people, what's not working. Because if we all try to take the right steps in the right direction and look at how we're doing things, it benefits us all a lot quicker, right? Rather than just trying to be selfish and go, I'm doing really well at this, I'm not going to tell anyone what I've changed to how I do it. We need to share that, because you're still always going to have people moving around your companies. That's great. There's lots of awesome companies and opportunities out there, but how do we bring all these awesome people into the fold? So it is looking at, language use when you advertise. We were at a apprenticeship fair once, and we had sort of a rolling video, and a parent and her child came over, and she actually thanked us for having subtitles, because I think we were one of two that actually had subtitles on what was going on that video, which her daughter needed. So it's just simple things we can actually change. That's not a lot of cost, not a lot of money, not actually a lot of effort, but will actually drive the diversity and the attraction piece to you as an organization. So yeah, question question how we're looked at, and ask people as well. You know, I'll look at things with my blinkers on, and I think something's great, but you know, go and ask, you know, people from different diverse backgrounds within your organisations what they think of how you're marketing or advertising yourselves as well.
Absolutely. I suppose moving on slightly, you know, we've gone through kind of quick fire actions that people can take, and we've discussed breaking down the barriers and, you know, balancing the scales. But I would really love to hear your suggestions on how you measure meaningful success and how organisations should follow suit. So we've actually had a question in the comments about this. You know, do you guys have any software recommendations, for example? You know, I've just said guys again, I really do apologise. Are you a fan of internal surveys? What stats do you track from an HR and recruitment perspective? You know, are you, for example, tracking retention rates, parental status, well-being, different socioeconomic groups, and your supplier and vendor diversity as well? Christine, could we start with you, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a few things that I'd say to this one. I think firstly, when you're looking at data, it is a challenge. There's no denying it. So I think, you know, one of the things that I would call out is at the moment it's only mandatory for us to collect information on gender and age. So as much as there might be the desire and the intent to collect broader data, we're effectively dependent on what additional data individuals are happy to volunteer to us. And that can make it challenging. And so we are actually going through an exercise within Vodafone at the moment in terms of collecting much broader data from our existing employee base to give us a better view of where we are at the moment, and then thinking about how we can more accurately and consistently collect that in the recruitment process too. I don't have any specific software recommendations, unfortunately. As Vodafone, we use SuccessFactors, and effectively it's a plug-in integration to that, but I'm sure some of the other panelists may be able to. And then I guess in terms of how you use that data once you have it, something we're doing at Vodafone is introducing smart targets. So, for example, we've got a broader aspiration by 2030 to achieve 40% of our senior roles being filled by females. And then we've got a number of annual targets that effectively feed into that so that we can make sure that we're on track and we will actually achieve that. And that then ties into monthly reporting that we do to say, actually, well, how are we doing? Are we keeping track? And start to then identify what some of the challenge areas might be for us in achieving that. So I think getting as much data as you can and then making sure you're actually using that, you're tracking that, and you're using that to open up the conversation around what is this telling us, how can we do better, where do we maybe need to pivot our approach slightly, is really important. In terms of the question around surveys, so we do use employee surveys within Vodafone, but we have changed our approach to that quite drastically in the last year or so. So we used to do the typical annual survey that would go out to all employees once a year. We've changed that now to a couple of more frequent surveys. So we have one that we actually introduced during the COVID period, but I think we will probably continue to do, which is a bit of a pulse survey. Very short, takes employees like 5 minutes to complete, but is very focused on how are you feeling, are you getting the support that you need, and what are your kind of pain points or challenges at the moment. So that gives us really tangible feedback on a regular basis that we can use and apply quite quickly, rather than, for any of you who will know, an annual survey process, the amount of work that would happen on the back of that to translate all of that data, then kind of move that into actions. It's definitely a worthwhile thing to do, but I think the more agile we can be in that approach, the better. And then we've also got some slightly less frequent surveys that are more based around our company's values and behaviours. So we've got a very kind of defined framework in terms of the values that we think are important for Vodafone. And then the surveys are very much based around, actually, for employees, in your experience, are you seeing those values and those behaviours reflected, brought to life? What are some of the barriers and blockers to that? So I mean, that data is really valuable and really useful. And then I guess the final thing that I would call out is then the more qualitative data. So thinking about feedback from our employee networks that I referenced earlier, focus groups, which will tend to run in different areas for different reasons, and interviews can also be just as meaningful. So it's important to look at the kind of hard quantitative data, but also think of the softer side of that too.
Paul, how do you measure meaningful success at JP Morgan?
Yeah, I agree with Christine. It is difficult. The data is incomplete at best, because you can't mandate this. So I think you have to, you have to get comfortable with that and work with what you have. Obviously, once people are onboarded, then your data tends to improve quite significantly. I think a few people have mentioned the point about retention. I think recruitment is only one piece of this jigsaw. It's very difficult to fill a bath when the plug is out, right? So I think using the data that you have to look not just at recruitment but also at promotion processes, attrition, etc. That's important. It really kind of brings the whole D&I piece together. And certainly we look very carefully at our promotion lists, and things like that to make sure, also, to alert us if there are, anomalies there, and if groups aren't, progressing as we might expect them to, proportionately. So I think that the other thing we're really focused on at the moment is looking at our recruitment funnel, our pipeline, and with the data that we do have, really looking at how candidates from different groups move through our funnel to try and identify whether there are obstacles, whether there is bias within that. So not just looking at applicants, but actually, how many people are being shortlisted, and of those, how many managers inviting through to interview, and how do they tend to fare at interviews, and all the way through to offer an onboarding. So I think looking at your end-to-end process in recruitment, but also then looking at your employee life cycle all the way through to offboarding is really important.
And Sean, what are you doing at BGSS?
Yeah, a lot of good points. Again, I think that attrition one, especially because we can spend a lot of time attracting, a lot of time trying to bring the right people in, and then actually if we're not giving people fair opportunities once they're in the business, what's the point in the first two steps ultimately, right? And understanding when people do move on, trying to go beyond just the usual couple of questions, a form's filled out, goes into a hole somewhere and is never seen again. So actually, do we look at that, use it, look at trends, and it sounds like Paul and his team have done some great work around that. So I'll probably pick his brains more later. One thing from a recruitment point as well is we use Greenhouse as our ATS, and what you can actually do is look at how many people are involved in interviews in the different stages, from a CV review to all the other stages, and you can look at their pass-through rates, and then you can actually start to break that down and try to spot trends. And again, it's like Paul mentioned, you don't have loads of data there, and you don't want to start making too many assumptions, but you can start to pick up on things. And we do ask a few D&I questions when people apply, but again, it's completely voluntary. So, again, it's some people may complete it, a lot may not, but it's better to have some data than not at all that you can start to work from. So that's a big thing. I think we try to train and educate, as everyone's mentioned as well. So, with everybody in Leeds has a line manager and a squad lead. So your line manager's there from your quarterly reviews and there for pastoral care, but the squad lead is purely there from a pastoral care point of view, and it just joins things up a little bit as well. So if somebody's got any issues, there's always somebody that they can talk to, or their delivery manager on project for us. But I've been doing that role maybe 6 months, I think, maybe longer, and it's great because you do build up these relationships, and I've learned so much from people from different backgrounds and different challenges they've had that I wouldn't have known before. But what it's enabled is to ensure that we're providing a safe environment for our people where they can be themselves, and I'm pretty sure most of us work to live, not live to work, right? So if we're spending a lot of time together like we do, you want everybody to be them true selves. So just those little touch points we've had as well has really helped, I think, for us, especially during everyone being remote, because it brings so many of the challenges that you can't imagine. So
definitely. And Rosemary, final word, because I can't believe it, but we're absolutely out of time. But how would you suggest businesses could measure meaningful success?
So can't add a lot more to what's been said now. All wonderful, great comments and suggestions for people to take away. But I think the key is you measure what matters to your organisation. So I started off the session saying you decide what D&I means to your organisation. So obviously you decide what matters to your organisation. So attrition rates is phenomenal. exit interviews, and not just slipping them into that slide, never to be seen again, into that folder. You might see a pattern of some people thrive under certain leadership and some people do not. There's one common thread in that. It might be the leader or the manager that's in that section or that team. So, look at your data, look at your the management, the leadership, look at all those elements to see what else can I do to measure what matters. And I do think that if people are leaving, if you're hemorrhaging employees, there's a reason behind that. So you've got to look at your culture, and then you've got to make changes if you want to really make a difference. So that's conscious of the time. So that's just a final thought.
Absolutely. I appreciate we didn't get round to our final question today, but what I will do is I will make sure that's questions answered in our email mailer afterwards. And we've got some questions in the Q&A that our wider team have taken down, and we'll make sure that they are answered in our email mailer as well. So we won't leave anybody out, we promise. I'd like to say such a huge thank you to our panelists for joining me today. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who has attended the Tech Recruitment Takeover training sessions this week. It's been such a pleasure to have you. We will be in touch via email. We will also be in touch about the wine tasting later today. And like I say, this session will be able to be found on YouTube later this afternoon. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.